Hello everyone, and sorry about so many videos in one day, but it's not my fault that Duda and Grischuk are obviously the two most interesting players on the planet, and well, these are very important games. So this is the sixth game of their match, so for those of you who are just tuning in, two of the classical games have been drawn. Then Duda won the first game of the Rapids, but Grischuk was able to retaliate, so he equalized, and then in the shorter rapid control, Grischuk was able to take the lead. So here Duda is in a very unpleasant must-win situation. He has the white pieces, he has to win. Let's see what happens. Duda with the white pieces opens with e4 this time. Sorry about that. We have e5 by Grischuk, knight to f3, knight to c6, knight to c3, and knight to f6, the four knights defense, and bishop to b5 by Duda, the Spanish variation of the four knights. And here, already very exciting stuff from Grischuk, knight to d4, the Rubinstein counterattack. So inviting all sorts of ideas. Maybe you're interested in the juicy e5 pawn. Maybe you're interested in capturing on d4. But Duda decides for bishop to a4. It's just best not to give away your bishop here. If you go for something like knight captures on e5, then you don't really win a pawn. After queen to e7, attacks knight goes back, now a trade on b5, and now you just capture on e4, so everything is perfectly fine for black here. So of course Duda is not interested in any unnecessary trades. Bishop to a4, he must win this game. We have c6, preparing d5, and now comes knight captures on e5. Now the pawn can be grabbed. We have d5 and now d3 by white. And interestingly, in 2009, Vasily Ivanchuk had this position against Fabiano Caruana in Biel, and Fabi went for bishop to d6 here. Chucky was able to win that game. But here we have bishop to c5, and this is a new move in the position. So already as of move 7, we have a completely new game. We have castles by Duda, castles by Grischuk, and now comes king to h1. So preparing f4, you don't want your king on g1 after this diagonal opens. We have queen to c7, attacking the knight, and now f4, just attacking that, defending the knight, and b5, pushing the bishop back, bishop to b3, and now a5, preparing a4 to trap the bishop. So of course a3, Duda makes room for the bishop on a2. Knight captures on b3, Grischuk trades once, c captures, and now bishop to d4. So with ideas of capturing on c3, but also you could have plans on capturing on e5. So knight back to f3, putting pressure on the bishop, and now bishop captures on c3. So here, if Duda would just capture, then Grischuk also wins the e4 pawn, so not interested in that. Duda plays e5. And okay, we have bishop captures on e5. You have to give back at least one piece, so why not bishop captures on e5? F captures, attacking the knight, and the knight to d7. And here bishop to f4. So Duda is able to keep the pressure going. Grischuk still having some problems in developing his light square bishop and the rooks. We have knight to c5, and now comes rook to c1 with an attack on the knight. Knight goes back to e6, attacks the bishop, and queen to d2. c5, preparing c4, and now comes d4. You cannot capture as rook captures queen. So we have c4 by Grischuk, and now knight to h4 with ideas of maybe getting the knight to f5. Maybe you can get the knight over to d6. Could be very nice. So queen to d8, getting the queen out of the c file, also attacking the knight on h4. And here bishop to g3, just getting the bishop out of the way, defending the knight for the moment, not going to f5 right away. And now comes knight to g5. Now Grischuk wants to get his knight to e4 with a nice attack on the queen and the bishop here. We have knight back to f3 and knight to e4. You can't really do anything about that. Queen to e3 and now bishop to f5. So here we have bishop back to e1. Duda avoids more trades, but it's always dangerous to disconnect your rooks like this, so he has to be very careful in doing so. And now rook to c8. Grischuk finally gets his rook into the game. We have h3. Duda makes some room for his king, and now h6. Grischuk does the same. Knight to d2, and now comes bishop back to g6, as the bishop is now under attack. So bishop to g6, and now knight captures on e4. We have bishop captures on e4, and now bishop to d2. Just connecting rooks again, developing the bishop. We have rook to c6, now with ideas of getting the rook over to g6, which would create a lot of pressure on the g2 pawn. So a4 by Duda, and now rook to g6. Of course, you have to defend g2. We have rook to f2, and now queen to h4, adding another attacker here. So here there are a lot of interesting ideas. If the queen ever moves from the defense of the third rank, even queen captures on h3 is an idea. So very unpleasant. King to h2, taking care of the g3 square, but also not allowing queen captures on h3 if the queen ever moves. So rook to b8, finally defending the b5 pawn, and now comes a captures on b5. Rook captures on b5, and now b captures on c4. We have rook captures on b2 by Grischuk, and now you could go for c5. c5 is definitely the way to go. Then it's a race, but it's not a favorable race for Duda, as he has to win this game. For example, a4, and now if c6, you can just go rook b3. And now white has problems, because the queen cannot capture due to queen captures on f2 would be just deadly. You have to block, and then just rook captures, bishop captures, still the queen cannot capture, and now you just eliminate the pawn. So not all that difficult to calculate. That it's not the winning idea. It might be the best move, but it's not. It's not easy to play the best move when you know it's not a winning move. So rook c to f1 instead, doubling up on the f-file. Still, it's no threat. You cannot capture here because just the rook captures on g2. So Grischuk just continues pushing the passed pawn with a4. And now, like I said, if you capture the pawn, you're getting mated. Rook captures here, check. You move a discovered check from the bishop. Whatever you play, queen captures on h3, let's say, is mate. So here after a4, we have g3 pushing the queen back, and now queen back to e7 by Grischuk. Finally, c5 now, and now rook to b3. Now the b3 square is even guarded. So we have bishop to c3. You cannot move the queen. If you move the queen, then just rook captures here, as both of the rooks are attacking the g3 pawn. So bishop c3 is a must. But now a3. Grischuk continues pushing his passed pawn. We have rook to a1. Now Duda will try to create some counterplay against the a3 pawn, and now rook to a6, putting a rook behind the passed pawn, of course. Queen to c1, and now comes f6, wanting to bust open the center. So if you capture here, then you will also most likely be able to eliminate all of the pawns. So rook f to a2. But Grischuk just captures on e5. He says it's not a problem. If you capture on a3, I'm just gonna play rook captures here. And if you capture queen to f6 wins the game for me. You will not be able to capture here because queen f2 check followed by queen to g2 mate as the bishop slices all the way here. So this is one example of a great bishop, and also this is one example of a terrible bishop. But it's often when you're in a must-win situation that you will end up with positions like these, unfortunately. So bishop back to d2 by Duda, and now e captures on d4, and finally c6. Duda starts pushing his passed pawn, but now queen to d6. Now threatening queen captures on g3. This will be mate, of course, as the bishop still covers all of the light squares, so you cannot allow this. We have bishop to f4 by Duda, now covering the c7 square, so hopefully c7 can be played, but now just queen captures on c6. Of course, Grischuk will not allow this pawn to go forward, and here Duda just played rook captures on a3, and I believe it was in this position that Grischuk offered Duda a draw, even though Duda is completely lost in this situation, but Grischuk doesn't need Duda to lose this game, as he just needs a draw to win the FIDE Grand Prix in Hamburg. And well, Duda will also save some rating points, maybe not lose so much in the match, and it's the gentlemanly thing to do. Plus you can always blunder something, so why not take a draw and win the Grand Prix? So it was in this position on move 45 that the players agreed to a draw, even though if you play it out a move or two, let's say you capture rook, a captures rook captures on a3, you can just play rook captures on a3, and now let's say rook to b1, and that's just it. White is lost. You cannot move the queen. Whatever you do with the queen, you could capture black's queen, but rook to h1 is mate because this bishop still controls this diagonal. So after this rook captures on a3, you could also try queen captures on c6, but after rook captures on a3, you might try queen captures on c6, but it's still not better. Just rook b2 check, and after the king moves to g1, now you play rook captures here. And yes, you can block with bishop to c1, but just rook captures, queen captures, and again rook to b1 wins the queen. So it's a bishop against no pieces, of course, completely winning for black, and also black is up at 2 pawns. So of course, after rook captures on a3, Duda gladly accepted the draw, and it is Alexander Grischuk who wins the FIDE Grand Prix in Hamburg 2019. And as I've heard, he well, most likely qualifies for the candidates tournament, but it all depends on how the other players play as well. I guess in Jerusalem in the last leg of the FIDE Grand Prix. So, but it's like 99% that Grischuk is in the FIDE candidates tournament 2020. So we're going to have a very exciting tournament there. And also here is a nice footage of Sasha getting up from the table and starting to celebrate early, whereas Duda, of course, is very disappointed. But you know, as there can only be one winner, only one player gets to celebrate. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. Again, sorry for so many videos today, but really it's not my fault. We do have to cover all of the interesting games for such an important finals. So yeah, I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Pravin Rajandran, Jimmy Thomas, and Anish Srinivas for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions, and hopefully we will we'll start a vote on our next big saga, let's say tomorrow. And I might not even make any videos tomorrow since we made so many today. So we'll see how it goes. So yeah, thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your Sunday.